Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. And if you live in Chicago, you know that we live in a city that's well known for its musical traditions. When we think about that, I think most of us think about the big acts that come through, Lollapalooza, Blues Fest, but there's an enormous scene of local music filled with local bands and local musicians that's well worth checking out. And in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell my audience that we're going to talk about a band that I play in tonight. The band is called Ring Shout and Friends, and I have two of my esteemed colleagues here with me tonight, George Bailey, Charles Torpe. Welcome to the show. Good to have you guys here in a different context from where we normally perform together.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, Kevin.
So I want to open by talking a little bit about the local music scene and just what it means to play local music, be a local band, and the importance of local music in the scene. So, George.
Well, I started out ensemble playing in Chicago, and that had its own definition of community. So when I moved to Oak Park, started playing with two people, three people, and you get known, you get seen differently when you're a small ensemble, and you get a small coterie of people who have expectations of you to be in certain places and play certain pieces. So it's bigger than that, but it's always a joy to be wanted.
I think we can all say yes to that.
You know.
Charles, so we talked a little bit before the show about community building and what community means in terms of music or being in a band or watching a band. What are your thoughts about the community nature of music?
I think for me, living in the Chicagoland area, it's nice because it doesn't feel a sort of competitive vibe like I imagine it is in New York or LA or whatnot. There's still an aspect, I think, of Chicago that has a hometown Midwestern feel, you know, to it. And so what I'm really grateful for is the opportunity to be in a variety of different scenes with a variety of different circles of musicians and in a variety of different bands. Sometimes the bands are more sort of art for art's sake, other times more community arts, and at times that these two circles intertwine and connect. And I think that that's some of the richness of Chicago, is to be able to operate in so many different circles.
And still feel that sense of community that can overlap, right?
Absolutely.
And George, I know you talk a lot about community, and being a published author, you've written about the subject of community. So how do you see music as fitting into the community or creating community?
Well, I'd like to pick up on a strand of what Charles was talking about in terms of there's so many different kinds of bands and so many different amalgams, and you can always find your stroke if you stay with it.
Yeah.
You can find you can find your place. And so I think, to me, community is about finding your place and having the place or the community either expand on you or shrink on you. But my link to Ring Shout has been it's almost like an amoeba. You know, people, you know, because, you know, sometimes there have been 12 or 13 of us on the stage playing, and then sometimes we shrink down to like like the groove trio, and it all comes with a different kind of vibe, and it's all good, and it's all community.
And speaking of size, one of the things that local bands do is playing in smaller venues. You know, and again, we think about, you know, like you think about Chicago, think about Lollapalooza or playing a Blues Fest or Jazz Fest, and bands on these big stages, and you're sitting way back, or Soldier Field, you're bringing your opera glasses to see the band on the stage or watch the screen. But it's a totally different vibe in these small clubs, right?
Right.
And so, Charles, what do you get out of that from playing these small venues? I mean, does that help to feel the music, connect to the audience?
I think it absolutely does. I mean, to be able to have an event it's almost like having a circus and raising the tent and putting out the flyers and getting everything together. And then when everything comes together in those couple hours, and just to be able to see friends and family in the audience and to see them react and them enjoying it, I always find it's a bit of a loop. Then I feel the energy of that, and then I think the rest of the band feels the energy of that, and then we put out more to them, and they put out more to us. And that's, I think, a different vibe than playing where there's 20 feet, you know, between the stage and the audience.
Row.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
No, I think we actually, I think we have a clip here to kind of demonstrate this. We have a compare and contrast set of clips to talk about this, or to demonstrate what we're talking about in these venues. And we'll see if we can get that up, and then we can comment after we've seen the clip. So if we're on that.
Yes, I love to do the Southland in that traveling minstrel show. Yes, I'm down to be a star, make them laugh. Sound just like a record on a phonograph. These days are gone forever, over a long time ago. Oh yeah.
So there we were in a small club playing a well-known song by Steely Dan. A doff of my virtual hat here to Walter Becker, who passed away this year. But we also, there's a clip we have of that same song in a larger venue. Right, we're playing at the River Forest Rotary, where we have that. And if we can get that queued up and take a look at the differences there. And we can, oh, well, instead of that, let's watch, talk about some of the guests we have. Now, I should point out that that young guitar player who was, we just saw was 15 years old. 15? And people sometimes ask, I'm sure you get this question too, why is the band called Ring Shout and Friends? Well, talk a little bit about, Charles, you met young Ethan first at that gig. Talk a little bit about our connection to him, or no prior connection.
And this gets back, Kevin, to the question about community. And where I first met that young man was actually when we played at the Rotary International gig in River Forest 2 years ago. And he was with School of Rock at the time. And I made sort of a nonverbal connection with him on stage, and he was just getting into the band. He even brought up his guitar by the stage. We didn't have an amp for it at the time, but he wanted to jump in the band. It ends up him and his family live right next door to the Eastgate Cafe when we were performing that night. He heard the music, came by,
recognized us,
went home, got his guitar, and then all second set, he sat in with us.
And we saw a little clip of him. The guy was remarkable. 15 years old.
Yeah.
Remarkable skill, remarkable talent.
Absolutely.
Right.
I just like to add the whole piece about community. It's what's that word? Serendipity.
Yes.
It's a place of explosivity. You don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be good. It's always feels as it's going to be good when people are communing at that level. There's something spiritual is going on, and of course musically, musical technique is happening, but something deeply spiritual is going on as well.
The technique is just a path for exploring that spirituality.
Absolutely.
Right?
absolutely.
Yeah, and if I could say, there's something about music, I see it's a language. And so we were there at the Eastgate Cafe speaking a language to one another. And here was another young man who could speak that language. And what a joy to be able to speak the language with new people and there be that, bring new things out of us and new things out of him. It just was a wonderful conversation.
And I should add that at that same show, there was also a guest saxophone player whom we had never met before, who played with us that night, who turned out to be excellent. But it's that same idea that music is something, it's a language, and it's a language that has a unique ability, I believe, to convey emotional truths.
Yeah.
And so to be able to connect on that emotional level with essentially strangers at that deep level is literally moving. You agree?
Right.
Yeah, I felt that night as well.
Well, that's the friend piece. You know, what is a friend? You know, you hope. I mean, some of the old definitions of friend apply, but like we're living right now where folk are have a lot of skill and a lot of desire, and I think one of the hallmarks of Ring Shout is that you know y'all come. You know, not that everyone can be in the band. You know, but you know that feeling persists, and we could talk, like you said, we could take a whole another show to talk about that.
How I got into this band was exactly the same instance of what happened with Ethan. Is that I came to a gig, I think at the Eastgate one time, and I was sitting in the front row and itching to play, just hearing the music, and George recognized that. He brought an extra guitar, and I sat in for a set, and I've been sitting in auditioning ever since, trying to get into this band.
In fact, I remember that night because we were jammed into an alcove inside, and when George invited you up, my first reaction was, oh my God, we're going to bring another person onto this tiny stage? How are we going to fit this together? But it turned out to be such a wonderful introduction, and personally, I'm so glad that you actually did step up.
Yes,
and play.
absolutely,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
It's been a wonderful journey since then, however
Yes.
many years ago that was.
Yeah, it was maybe 5, 7 years ago. I remember that night of, and I'm almost reminded of the 60s acts that used to play with their guitars like this, because there was no room to hold my guitar like this. I had to play like this.
I think
But
we all
were
feel that thing.
accommodating,
Yeah.
you know, and that was what was wonderful and continues being.
And just one more thing about that, like there are people who've gone on before this amalgam right now, and who are still come back. You know, Carl, he comes back every once in a while, and you know, plays his percussions, and you know, he fits right in. He comes in, and he fits right in,
As if he never left.
as if he never left, and he really hasn't.
So
his way.
let's change subject a little bit. I know both of you sing and play guitar. You both play lead guitar, rhythm guitar, and you sing. And that's both kind of a way of soloing. You know, like if you sing, that's your way of expressing yourself through the emotion of the lyrics. When you play solo, it's also an expression of emotion. But talk a little bit about how that's different. Actually, I think we've got a clip here that we can show to demonstrate this. And if we get that rolling, we'll take a look at that. And then as soon as we do, we'll come back and talk about this subject of solo versus singing.
Come, it's stormy Monday. Tuesday's just as bad. Come, it's stormy Monday. Tuesday's just as bad. Lord, and Wednesday's worse. Thursday's now so sad.
So Charles, there you were in all your glory, both playing and singing. So it looks seamless, of course, from the audience point of view, but those are two different things. It's almost two different parts of your brain doing that sort of thing. So how do you see those as different and yet accomplishing the same goal?
Well, I see even in that clip as I'm watching it that
It's always embarrassing to watch yourself. We already
of course it
grant
is.
that,
I
right, right.
already I can count all the mistakes that I made. Right?
That no one besides you
That
would.
right.
Right.
Of course, it's the musician's curse.
Yeah.
Though for singing and playing guitar, to me, it's about almost taking on characters. And it's, when I'm singing, it's how do I want to get across the story of the song? And that may be technically then, am I singing, you know, more head tone or chest tone or a gut tone? And even in that clip, I can see myself switch between those. And it's similar with guitar, that, you know, at times, you know, the tone of it, the volume of it, is there sort of more distortion, more dirt, more grit, or is it
But
less?
it's still telling a story.
Still
even through
telling
the
a
solo.
story and building a story through both the guitar and vocally.
And George, you yourself are both a singer and a guitar player. And so when you're singing, and well, so we don't actually have a clip of you just at the moment, but equally soulful, how do you think of that when you're up on stage doing that?
Because I've come, you know, I see myself always moving towards something musically that hasn't arrived yet. That's how I see it.
Continually approaching.
Yeah, right. I think of the solo as a search, because I'm searching for something. And I'm not satisfied with it sometimes, but I'm always in it. I'm gonna try to stay present to it. And the vocal part for me is like a solo. It's my version of, well, if I can't technically, musically get to the solo that I know I'm going to eventually arrive at, I feel a lot safer about expressing it vocally.
I hate to make this analogy to sports because everyone always does, but if you're having a bad day in offense, you play defense, or if you're having a bad day on defense, you play offense. But it's a way to, if something's not working, there's this other thing that can work and get you back into the spirit of what's happening with the music, right?
Can I just
go for it?
When I'm standing next to Charles and he's soloing, I'll be transparent. I'm thieving.
Trying to hear those licks, steal them for later.
I'm thieving, man, because you know he's in a place where a lot of guitar players want to go, and so I really appreciate the opportunity of being in that space.
Well, in fact, as a quick compliment, a friend of mine who has spent time with some very well-known musical names, people you would recognize, actually said, wow, that Charles guy, he totally shreds.
Yeah.
So there you go. Someone who's hung out with the best thinks that you totally shred.
It's wonderful to hear that, and it's wonderful to feel people's energy in the crowd of getting that, and even in the clips of so playing a riff or a lick and then looking out in the audience and kind of seeing what the reaction is, and that can lead to what's the next part of the story.
Right.
And there's that constant loop and that constant of creation in the moment. Yeah.
So let me digress for a moment, because you know one of the things that the band talks about itself as being is this rock-infused jazz. Like, and that's a great tagline, but what is it? You know, what does that really mean? Now I think I'm hoping that we have in fact a clip of this that we can bring up, so let's see if we can get something up to demonstrate it. So That's in fact an original song written by one of our other guitar players, Steve Smith, called Running Man. So do you think that's indicative of what we think about when we're thinking about rock-infused jazz?
Well, I've thought about this, and sometimes I struggle with it, and sometimes I accept it for what it is. I see myself coming out of a blues household, because all of my uncles, like my grandfather played the banjo, he'd steal my grandmother's thimbles and put them on his finger, create the unworldly sound. It is what I think Miles Davis tried to get at. You know, in I can't say this word on the air.
Somebody's brew.
Yeah, somebody's brew.
Yeah, right, right.
And when I think of what we're trying to do, not that we're trying to do what Miles is trying to do, but
why not model yourself on one of the best ever?
Yeah, when I think of rock-infused jazz, I think of a lot of the cuts on that, and that's Steve achieved it quite well.
Yeah, Charles?
My sense is that any musician that is interested in improvisation, about really developing their voice and being able to play it with multiple people and multiple songs through multiple changes, we're on the road to jazz. I mean, to me, it's, and I started, you know, too, playing blues and rock, and then developed an interest in jazz. And so I think that that's just our own evolutionary path as musicians, that we bring a blues and rock element into jazz because that's where we're going.
And so it becomes something else. It's not pure jazz in the 50s sense of the term, but it's got that same idea of continual improvisation and live in the moment kind of thing. Right?
That sensibility and some of the sounds, you know, also of rock, especially amongst us guitarists that like to have a lot of effects and filters and pedals and things, and we like to bring that in, a more of a fused medium.
And speaking of lots of guitar players, we've talked a bit about how many people are sometimes in the band, and it's interesting to see how that gets organized on stage, because we don't always know how many people are going to be at a gig. And so I think we have a clip here that shows a little bit of that kind of controlled chaos that goes on stage. So I should point out about that clip, I'm glad we're still hearing it in the background because we can talk about it as we listen to it. That's Jeff, the guest saxophone player, who just stepped in and played harmonies. I don't think he'd ever played that song before, but knew how to do that. And it's a two-chord song. There's really not structurally much going on there, but yet it was passed around, the leads were passed around, and it kind of becomes an organic thing, right? I mean, Charles, you're the ringleader on, excuse me, the ringmaster of the circus on stage.
Yeah, that to me, that song really gives the opportunity for us to stretch out and to be organic. And I think that that's some of the best moments of this band of Ring Shout and Friends. I think it enables the and friends part of it, because I think that there is a commitment to listening to one another and having a sense of one another's pockets and one another's strengths. And so how can we make it work with three guitars? It's because my experience, and I believe George is similar, we're listening to each other. So just to diagram it, George may be playing a blues riff, and then Steve's doing some funky thing on wah. And then in that song, I'm putting on a reggae delay pedal thing, and it all blended.
Because each person is able to find their space within this larger group.
And culturally, if I may just put this in, because it's really happening, I think. What is it? There's a kind of complexity in sameness, you know, where you're playing two chords, but actually, when when you get down there and you diagram what everyone else is doing,
There's a lot more going
there's
on.
There's a lot more going on, and so with 3 guitars, sometimes you have a greater opportunity to.
In fact, we have
expand
another
on that.
clip about the 3 guitars. I'm glad you bring that up. So let's see if we can roll that next clip about the 3 guitars. Here's Steve. So, as I saw you getting a little bit of the Who, in there, right?
That was the rock infused.
The rock infused part of the jazz band.
Definitely
Right.
had it.
Yeah.
You know what came to mind for me in that clip was that there was a call and response. So I think George is talking about the roots and everything. So Steve was playing a riff, and then I was responding to it, and making a comment. So there was a conversation that was going back, which was innovative and improvisational in the moment, and yet has deep roots in the blues tradition.
Absolutely, absolutely, and jazz.
And jazz, yeah.
Well, in fact, call and response, it's, cultural, goes back
Cultural,
to the fields, right?
Cultural, that's a cultural piece, yeah.
Yeah.
That's another discussion.
Yes, we could have many on the subject.
Right.
Right. And I just want to point out before we run out of time that I'm really sorry that I didn't bring my hat here, because clearly that was part of the setup, but I didn't quite have that together. So we do have another clip, and it's about again sort of managing the chaos on stage and picking solo orders. So we're going to go back to a song we just saw a little bit of. The Bermuda Blues, but how, once again, we can be in the moment and make it work.
Okay, thank you.
So I think there's no better way to go out than to demonstrate how it really works on stage, because we're pretty much out of time. So I want to thank you guys for both being here. It's a pleasure having you on the show. It's a pleasure playing with you in the band.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Absolutely.
It
Just like on stage.
Just like on stage, same thing. So once again, thanks again, guys. George,
Okay.
Charles, thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you,
for
Kevin,
having
so
us.
much.
And I want to thank our audience for joining us once again on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. I'm the bass player in the band you're hearing. And you can catch Public Perspective every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19. You can see us on the web at publicperspective.tv. And you can find the band on Facebook at Ring Shout and Friends. So until next time, thank you and good night.
Yeah.